So my girlfriend wanted a PC. Now, the reason why she wanted a PC is because she wanted something that she can game on. And unfortunately, her 2020 iMac is not cutting it. So she came to me with $2,500 and told me build the best freaking PC. But it has to be under two conditions. One, that it's fully white, and two, that it has really pretty lights. So with that budget and all the information I got from Daniela, we are going to build her the best gaming / editing PC. And in addition, I'm also going to have her help me. So let's get on PC Part Picker, build her the best $2,500 PC, and so that way she can get rid of that janky old iMac.
Hey.
All right, so let's get to this building. So these were all the parts that we bought for Daniela's brand new white PC. Now, getting on with the start of the shows, we had a 2TB SSD drive as well as the i7 13700K CPU. We also had 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, of course with RGB lights. And for our GPU was going to be a 4070 Ti Super by Asus. For the CPU cooler, Kraken 240 RGB. Last but not least, we had the power supply, the RM850 80 Plus Gold Edition. And last but not least, we had the most important part, which was the screwdriver. Starting off the build, we are going to start off with the motherboard. I had Daniela do the honors of taking it out and getting started with the build. So this is our very first part that she took out. But before we touched anything, of course, I had to open up the manual. Remember, guys, if you are just starting off building a PC, always read the manual. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up.
Why are you running?
Okay, so after reading the manual, we got started with working on the motherboard. Now, the very first thing we are going to start off with is plopping in the CPU. So you had to lift up this arm bracket here that holds the CPU cover. Next, we took out the Intel i7 13700K, this beast CPU. I had Daniela do the honors of dropping the CPU into the CPU socket, but unfortunately, she got a little bit afraid of pushing down that rod. So I had to do the honors of pushing down the rod and locking in the CPU in place. All right, onwards to the next part of the build. We were going to plop in this white DDR5 RAM. Now, the only reason why we got this RAM was because it came with RGB, which Daniela really wanted because she wanted to make this PC just pop. Unfortunately, at this point, we came across our very first issue, and that issue was actually a really big issue where we accidentally got the wrong motherboard for this RAM, and the RAM was not going to fit due to the fact that this motherboard was for DDR4 and not DDR5. So we had to take a quick trip to Best Buy.
Well, we got to grab a quick part. Please hold. We're back, and we got the right motherboard. So let's put back the CPU and then put in the RAM afterwards.
Are you sure about that?
After our fun trip to Best Buy, we decided to buy this MSI motherboard, which worked perfectly with the DDR5 RAM. Once we installed the RAM, I had Daniela do some ASMR to help relieve my stress. At this point, we were about 10-15% done with the build, and the next step we had to do was install the storage. So we got a 2TB SSD NVMe, and unfortunately, I had a little bit of issues trying to put this in. For some reason, it wasn't latching on to the part that it was supposed to go into, but eventually I got it down and I installed the heatsink.
Careful,
And at this point, we took a break from working on the motherboard and actually grabbed the case. So the case we were using here is NZXT H6 Flow. Of course, it had to come in white so that it can match the rest of the aesthetics of the PC. Once we got the case out of the box, I was able to get a first-hand look of this bad boy. And to be quite honest, I was very impressed. I really like this case. Now, a big feature that I really liked about this case was that you can unscrew this mount right here that can hold basically a hard drive. The fact that we already installed a storage unit into the motherboard, we didn't need it, and it allowed us to give us more space for wiring once we were done with the PC. And honestly, for a first-time build for a lot of people, that is awesome. Now, the next part that we decided to work on was the actual CPU cooler. So we got this Kraken 240 RGB, which is my first time working with anything like this. I usually use fans for CPU coolers, but this one's a little different. This one actually has liquid running through the radiator and down to the CPU cooler, that little circular part. And the reason why I got this was, one, because Daniela really wanted to run GIFs on her PC, but also the fact that we live in Las Vegas, it gets really hot in the room. So this should be able to control the temperature of the Intel 13700K without any issues. But unfortunately, I did have to look over the manual a couple times because this is my first time working with something like this. And to be quite honest, it wasn't too difficult difficult. I think if it's your first time building a PC, it's not going to be the most challenging thing to work on, but you definitely are going to need to have patience and maybe watch a couple of YouTube tutorials, as this was a little bit tricky to get all together once we get a little bit further into the build. So we installed the standoffs, which basically the cooler is going to screw into, and once we got all the standoffs on, I decided to go on to the next part, which was the power supply.
So we got these because Daniela wanted everything in the case to look white. Glad that it came with white cables. Should make it aesthetically pleasing, right, Daniela?
Right.
All right, let's get the power supply in the case.
Taking the power supply out, I had to admire it because I had never actually seen a white power supply. So this is kind of rare for me, but I installed it into the case, just had to put in 4 screws. Next, I moved the case to the side so that I can attach the motherboard. And then once we were done installing the motherboard, we were going to plug in some of the actual power cables to the motherboard from the power supply. Just making sure everything was tightened up, I started working with my very first cables, which was going to be the CPU power. And luckily this thing was modular, so it came with a lot of cables, but we only needed to use a couple of them. So that's why I really like this modular power supply, due to the fact that you don't have to really use 13 different cables in the build, and you could just use the ones that are necessary. Now, once everything was clicked in, we were going to work on installing the actual CPU cooler into the case. Now, the first thing I started off with was installing some of the cables into the actual pump, and then the next part was to install the radiator onto the actual case. So this radiator right here, I put it onto the top. After we were done installing the radiator, we were going to actually attach the pump to the CPU. All we had to do was just take off the cover. Luckily, it already came with pre-installed thermal paste, so if you guys do decide to get this CPU cooler, it's actually very easy. You just have to screw down the CPU pump into the motherboard. Use these little screws right here. You just hand tighten them at first. Remember to go diagonally because it makes it a lot easier to attach these onto the screws. And then once I was done hand tightening these screws, I grabbed my trusty old screwdriver, just gave it a little bit of more torque to make sure that it was properly installed onto the motherboard. So now that that was all done, we were basically almost halfway done with the build. You can see that I'm giving up the thumbs down, or I guess thumbs up, depending on what orientation you're looking at. But the next part we had to do was the part that I hate the most, which is wire cleanup. Now, my philosophy with this is try to make it as neat as you can, because eventually you don't know when you're going to have to go back into the PC, and you want to know which wire connects to what. But for me, I literally just use zip ties to try to clean up as much as I can, attach wires that are close together. So if there's fan wires, I put those together. Just kind of like a mess, but a mess that makes sense, a little organized. So I worked on the back of the case with the wiring. Afterwards, I got the power for the motherboard as I snaked my way through that little gap. And you can see that it had the white sleeve, which just matched perfectly with the build. At this point, Daniela was getting really giddy about seeing the PC come together, and the fact that all the white was actually matching really, really well. And the next part that I had to do was just connect some things on the bottom, and then we got to the fun part. That right there in your hand is a graphics card. Where do you think that goes in the computer?
I don't know.
It's gonna go right there.
Now, Daniela had never seen one of these, and I tried explaining to her what this does, but I don't think she really understood. All she knows that it was very expensive and that she was going to be able to unwrap everything.
Look at that. This is the thing that everybody goes crazy for.
So the GPU that I got her was the 4070 Ti Super by Asus, and the reason why I got this GPU for her is because she's going to be doing a lot of gaming as well as editing on Premiere Pro. So it's a GPU that's going to work really well with productivity as well as gaming, and it should last her for at least 4 to 5 years, especially if she games only in 1440p. Now, the only thing I didn't like about this was that it came with black cables and it kind of ruined the aesthetic, but I got over it and she thought it was all right. Afterwards, we just connected the rest of the cables for the front panel, and this was starting to look closer and closer to a PC. So the last thing I had to do was install a fan in the rear of the case. This is going to be our exhaust fan, which is basically going to help airflow, and hopefully with the way that all this is set up, it allows air to go through and can keep the components at a reasonable temperature. Now, the very last thing I had to do was just do a little bit of cable management. Wasn't the best, but did the trick, and I was able to close the case on the side, peel off this lovely sticker and the rest on the motherboard, And then it was time to turn it on. Or I thought it was time to turn it on. Now, I found out what the issue was. It was just that I forgot to plug in the power cord, which gave me a mini heart attack because I thought the components were dead on arrival. But once I got it plugged in, we turned on the switch and this is what happened.
That's a good sign. There's light. That means there's current going through. Turn it on. Oh, snap.
Gosh, that looks awesome.
It works. We just need to know how it looks like on the computer monitor. So let's go grab one. Okay, so Daniela turned on the PC. It works, but the only thing is, does it actually work on the monitor? We know it turns on, but will it actually give us picture? I can't get over how good that looks. Soon we're gonna be able to fix all the lighting so it looks even better, so it can all be one singular color. So everything turns on. Looks like all the fans are working. Let's see what shows up on here.
Now at this point, I was getting a little bit worried because typically when you turn on the PC and it's connected to the monitor, it should automatically turn on and give you some type of input, but it wasn't really reading anything and we were just sitting there with a no input screen. So I was very confused on why it wasn't working.
Uh-oh, that's not good. Let's see why it's not working. Maybe it needs to go on this one. Okay, let's see if that works. Always the hard part about building a PC. If it's gonna ever post. No signal.
I was very proactive in trying to find out what the heck was going on with this PC, and luckily I found my answer.
Came for a snack break and he already figured it out.
Alright, I figured out what the issue was. So I looked on YouTube, and I guess with the graphics card, which is this right here, with this particular motherboard, if you put it on the top slot and you don't update the BIOS, it doesn't read the graphics card. So basically, we have to update the system in order for us to be able to use that top slot in layman's terms. So let's update it right now. Luckily, the CPU has its own integrated graphics. Basically, there's a part that is the brains of the computer, but also has a little version of this in it. So we can still get something. We can still get picture. Let's go update the BIOS. All right, guys. It worked. It worked. I updated the BIOS and plugged in the cable to the graphics card, and now it works. Everything is running fine. All the fans are working. We're done basically. All we have to do is install Windows, play some games, and we are good. Also, we gotta adjust the lighting. Daniel, do you like the lighting right now? It's like all over the place, right? You want it all one color?
But it's rainbow right now. I don't mind.
Yeah, guys, this is our Intel 13700 build. I'm gonna put on the panels, and then I'll probably show you guys some like B-roll shots with all the panels on. But thank you for tuning into the journey. It's gonna be Daniela's gaming / editing PC.
Yeah, thanks to this guy right here. You can catch me streaming pretty soon here. We'll be playing games, chatting, hanging out, all of the above. So thank you.
And then we can also play Roblox with each other.
Yeah, let's do it.
Alright guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Glad that everything is working out. We ran across a lot of issues, but we finally got it working. Took all day, but that's the beauty of making a PC, because once it's done and you see this gorgeous finish, it's honestly really fulfilling. But alright guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Leave a like, hit the subscribe button if you guys enjoy the content, and see you guys next time. Peace.